We're just about ready to begin. A couple of administrative items before we start. If you would, look around the seat you're in, look underneath, in front of you. Do you see a remote? A clicker? It was here Wednesday night. It is not here now. We have a way to work around it for me. But if you do see it, just go ahead and raise it. Another thing I've just discovered is I had an extra cell phone in my jacket. Okay. I don't know how I got there. That's the way remotes disappear, you know, the same way. Okay. I think we are ready to begin. So obviously no one saw it. If you do see it, you might just give it to one of the elders, one of the people working AV, or put it up here in between classes. If you happen to see it, we would appreciate that. We'll be looking at Exodus starting in 21 for the class, and I'm going to attempt to do 21, 22, 23, and 24. So, any questions on chapter 21? Let's go to 22. No, we'll do that in a second. But before we begin class, let's start with a word of prayer. I'd like to ask Joe if he would to direct our minds in the prayer. Shall we pray? Amen. Just an FYI, I'm putting my phone here. If I ask you where it is later, just remind me I stuck it in here. Okay. So we're on chapter 21, and just a few maps at the beginning. This is general area. I don't have a green light that I can point at that, but just as a general comment, this is the area encompassed by the book of Exodus, and really it's in some ways a small area that we're looking at, and yet it's going to take years for this story to unfold. And we're in the middle of it unfolding right now. So, those were the routes. I went backwards there, okay. And we had just finished up them coming to Mount Sinai from Rephidim. They crossed over the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, coming into the Negev, or that peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula, and traveling down there, and they've had some hardships on the way, but nothing like what they're going to experience over the next 40 years or 38 years or so. So, we'll move along from that. A picture of today, Mount Sinai, but we don't know that's actually the Mount Sinai that where the tablets were given, where the law was given, where the encampment of 1 million to 3 million people possibly around this area, but it does give a good look at what it is. And we don't know exactly what the climate might have been in that area at that time. However, probably this is what it looked like will assume that what they identify today as Mount Sinai, that is near or maybe it as far as where the law was given. And this is what it would have looked like when they were approaching the mountain, which is where we are today. And it talks about the cloud and the fire. The picture makes it look like a volcano, and many commentators have assumed that it was a volcanic event occurring. However, the Bible itself doesn't mention anything specific as far as a volcano, and really it's the presence of God that is displayed in this way for many reasons. I think the primary reason, my assumption is to get the attention of the people, to show them something special is going on here. And not only will you see the presence of God as it's just manifested here in terms of fire on the mountain, and the cloud that surrounded it, the clouds that surrounded it. But I'm sure the sound of the thunderings, lightnings, the flames itself, all of this, the sight and sounds associated with it, and possibly the feelings. You know how if there's lightning nearby and thunder, we can feel that. If you've been ever to Cape Canaveral for liftoff of one of the big rockets over there, you can even feel that as it's going up. My assumption is that God would have put together to appeal to the senses of the people all of these circumstances together where it's like shaking them and getting their attention. Something special is going on here. And this is a big deal, the giving of the law. So, having said that, let's move on. This is God giving the law, and we know that the 10 Commandments have been given, but now we're getting into a section where there's more detailed and specific application of the principles that He has just delivered to the people in terms of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20. And now He's going into more specific application. And so that's where we find ourselves now, is set, the scene is set for the giving of the rest of the law, the Book of Covenants, if you will. And that's what we'll be studying today. So, giving of the law, chapters 21 through 24. First point I want to make is that the giving of the law was really a gift. And this gift is intended for mankind, but it's intended also for a special people, a peculiar people, a particular people that God has set aside for the giving of the law. And one of the things we want to remember is that a lot of what goes in to the giving of the law in terms of the details and the application of that, or the principles rather, still apply to us today. And many of them parallel what is going on in the New Testament, and specifically with Christ coming and the establishment of the church. And so there's so many similarities there. And we talked about this in our early lessons, how the book of Exodus is in the New Testament, and it's all the way through the New Testament. Christ quoted passages and incidents from there, and the later writers, the apostles and the writers of the New Testament also quoted from the book of Exodus. And so it's very important from that standpoint. Okay, so the law is a gift. I like this phrase. I borrowed it from one of the lectures, speakers at Florida College a couple years ago on the book of Exodus and the giving of the law. And it said the law was more than just a formulaic code for detailed and explicit direction of every aspect of an Israelite's life. It was complete and thorough, if you want to use words from 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. God's word was complete and thorough. And there is a tendency that we have, I think sometimes, myself included, to dismiss some of the parts of the Old Testament. And I would say I was more so this way when I was young in the faith. But as you study more and more about it, or if you were brought up to study more and more about it, you realize how important the Old Testament is in terms of the story and understanding what is in the New Testament. So, this law is more than just a formulaic code. However, and it was complete in all respects, in terms of morals, morally, how do we react to people? What is our relationship with God, number one? And number two, what is our relationship with other people? And basically the Ten Commandments, in effect, map that out and is developed more in what we're studying today. And there's civil law in terms of restitution for property problems between the people of God. And there's not much, there is a criminal code, but a lot of what happens here tends to be, if this happens, this needs to happen. It's expedited, this is my term, expedited justice, and God gives the direction for that. And probably one of the reasons is these people are sojourners, they're travelers, they're moving encampment. And while they may stop for a while at certain locations, they're still people who are sojourners. They're not into their promised land yet. They're traveling there, and while they're traveling, they needed laws that could be expeditiously appointed and taken care of and move on. That's my personal opinion. Even dietary laws. So all aspects of our conduct as people of God are covered for the children of Israel by God to direct them. The specifics of the law, they're so specific, and we could go to Leviticus, which we've already studied previously, but we could go to Leviticus and look at more detail about how that law was applied. And most of us, self-included, if we're not careful, we'll snooze through a book like Leviticus because there's so much detail about the law. But as JP was teaching us on this some time back, he points out there's very important parts of that and talk about our lives and our relationship with God and with other men that still apply today. Okay, so let's move on to this. So, if we look at chapter 21, verses 1 through 11, we're not going to read these as we go through. This will save some time, obviously, but there's lots of detail contained in these chapters, and I want to get through them as quickly as we can without doing harm to what the text says either. So this law is about laws on servants and slaves. And those terms that are used there, servant, slave, in other cases, maidservant, or worker or employee, all of these terms describe the same type of person as far as the Old Testament, as far as the law is concerned. This biblical law that we'll be reading, or that we're looking at here, we'll not be reading it, doesn't imply or sanction the abuses of slavery, especially that we had in this country 100, 200 years ago, and more. It doesn't imply or sanction those abuses at all. In fact, the law that God set up had restrictions on what masters, employers could do in terms of those that were working for them, and what was the moral treatment of those people that worked for them. These servants, these slaves that we're talking about here, had rights and dignities as individuals that our own slavery practices and slavery practices of other countries over the years have had. That's not to say that even with the children of Israel, these rights and these dignities, doesn't say they weren't abused, but it does say that God took detail and took effort to display to them what is the moral, ethical treatment of other people that may be working for you. The types of servants, slaves, and workers could have been foreign-born servants whose lives were spared in war. They come in, they make a conquest, and in effect, they haul off a lot of people. And those people are foreign-born servants. They were allowed to live indefinitely as permanent workers under these laws that God had set up for them. There were also, as pointed out in this first part, the 6-year servants that were servants for 6 years, and then they had another year that they could go free after that. So we use the term in our country, in the early part of our country, we had indentured servants, where they would be under service to a master for a period of time, but they were earning their way out of that bond, if you will, to their own freedom. There were servants that were born in their boss's household, and there's special treatment of them because, in effect, the boss, if you will, I use that term accommodatively, the master has responsibility to those children that were born, and servants that were born in the boss's household, and there are temporary employees and permanent employees. In fact, a servant could choose to be a servant under a master for the rest of their life on a permanent basis. For whatever reason, but it was their choice if they wanted to do that. So there were no major businesses back then, and so most of the industry, if you will, were cottage industry, household industries, that type of thing back then. No major corporations or whatever. And yet some of the principles still apply as far as master, boss, employee, whatever. Now, moving on. There were also, in verses 12 through 36, see how fast we went through 111? And 12 through 36, there's laws about personal injuries. And, you get into talking about personal injuries, first thing that comes to my mind are the TV attorneys that advertise, about personal injuries all the time. All of this is covered in these passages. In verses 12 through 14, it talks about intentional and unintentional homicide. How do you handle that situation? In 15 through 17, it talks about assault on parents, kidnapping of parents, and cursing of parents. And let's take a look at that. That's of special interest. 15, whoever strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. Pretty simple, right? I mean, that's not hard to understand. Whoever steals a man and sells him, kidnapping, anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. And verse 17, whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. Now, the implication from that is, I think, there's some judgment used there. I mean, probably, 90% of us wouldn't be here today if our parents had carried out these laws right here. And thankfully, they didn't. However, this would indicate someone who would have the audacity to strike his father or his mother. What does that indicate about that person?
No respect.
What's that?
No respect.
No respect, exactly. And this is not, in my opinion, this is not just a kid having a little fit or something. This is getting to the point that they've grown into a young person who is, first of all, doesn't have that respect, and then secondly, demonstrates it by slapping or hitting, it says striking, by striking their father or their mother. So that was taken very seriously in the Old Testament. And again, we don't have the same laws today, and it calls to mind to me that it would seem that a father and mother would have a responsibility, therefore, to raise children who are not going to behave this way. So that's a whole nother discussion that we could go down the road on that. We're not going to do. But still, that's how seriously God took this idea of respect and honoring of parents. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yes, Alex?
Also, one of the character of God and what he seems to emphasize is the respect, not just respect in general, but respect for authority. And that plays out throughout, beyond even the parental aspect, it's into the political.
Right.
The idea of respecting authority is important to God.
Yes.
It's almost as if we're in the testing grounds of appreciation for authorities, regardless of whether or not we agree or not, and seems to be something that is significantly important to God at this time. People of Israel, as they're about to go out into a new law, a new rule, hey, this is important to me, you respect authority.
Right. And that respect, like respect for authority, and we're going to get into that about respect for government, that type of thing, government leaders, later in one of these other chapters. But it's these lessons start at home. These lessons start at home. Yes, Zach?
Verse 17 of chapter 21, too. I mean, it's the complete flip side of the coin of verse 12 from chapter 20. So you've got honor your father and mother that your days may be long. Talk about how Paul talks about that's the first commandment of the promise. And then
Right.
17, that word curses, it's really the opposite of honor. It could be translated dishonor as well. So he's saying here,
Right.
whoever dishonors his father and mother, put him to death. So he's showing how that promise will be enacted.
So it's a complete reading on the treatment of your parents. Here's the positive side of it, that you'll be blessed for your days, and then the opposite side, which is, or you'll be killed. So either way, there's a treatment, positive and negatively, if you will, of the treatment of children toward parents. And again, I get back to, it starts with the parent properly training the child at home, is where it starts. Now, that's not to say that in this case, that the parents didn't try, In fact, the implication would be they didn't. But even still, if the result is that there's a dishonorable child, if there's a child who goes so far as to strike their father or their mother, this implies, well, first of all, is very much disrespect. It's very much against the teaching of God. That's the important point. It's against the teaching of God. God doesn't condone this. And so, in our society today, some of you are aware of this, but if you discipline your child in public, that could have legal consequences potentially for you. And you say, well, that's silly. Nobody does that. Well, I beg to differ. Congregation I was in before in Texas, a woman disciplined one of their kids, I would say bratty little kids, one of their boys, in the grocery, and that discipline, which was a smack on the bottom, was seen by someone, and they were reported to Child Services. And Child Services intervened to interview to see if the children were being abused in the home. So, excuse me. So that kind of thing can happen. That can happen. And we've got to be careful that we don't give in to society about all of this. I can remember at university years and years and years ago when it was just Canaan, and I said something to a mother about, well, you know, she'd asked my advice on something. I said, maybe a little pat, you know, on the bottom might help some of that. And the response was, oh no, Mike, I can't do that. These other mothers would just think I'm being terrible if I do that. That's what the comment was. Fortunately, that youngster turned out to be a pretty good kid. But I'm just saying, if your motivation is how you look in front of other people, rather than what's best for the kid, the child, and what's best for the child is a form of discipline to where they have control, where they keep control of themselves. Okay, let's move on. 18 through 21 has to do with life-threatening injuries, in some cases to their slaves. And then 22 through 27 has to do with permanent injury to them, so some more specifics there. And then verses 28 through 36 are injuries that are caused by or to animals. Now, animals today primarily are pets, right? I mean, as far as our animals are concerned. But in that time, in that type of society and culture, animals were very important. And, you know, a cow, a sheep, a goat, and whatever is very important in terms of sustaining a family, in terms of milk and meat and those kind of things. And so even the plowing and that type of thing with oxen, if you hurt somebody else's piece of equipment, there should be a penalty for that. And so this goes into what the penalties would be for that type of injury. Okay, any comments on chapter 21? Good, we're going to move on. Oh, I'm sorry, there is a comment, Leanne. I will not tell you who that was. You know who it was. Okay. It wasn't you. Okay.
I just find it interesting, especially in today's environment. Going back to verse 22 through 25, it is in the scenario of men fighting and harming a woman with child that causes premature birth or death of that child. And it's in that scenario that we have the language
Right.
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for life. That child has value in his life.
That's right. And not only does it have value, but it's recognized as an entity apart from the mother, but certainly being carried by the mother at this point. And I'm glad you brought that up. And the eye for eye, tooth for tooth is in light of how do you repay for an injury in that type of situation. Now, some of that would imply you got to wait for the baby to be born to see what the effect of the injury would have been, if it's not an immediate miscarriage that happens. But it could be an injury that would occur, that would be evident later after birth. And so then what do? Well, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that type of thing, which indicates a response that is proportionate, we say today, that is balanced in terms of what the injury was. Okay, good point. Any other comments? Yes. Right. There's another body involved, if you will, in this specific case here. But thank you for those comments. Appreciate that. Okay. Let's move on. Chapter 22. And the first part of this, verses 1 through 15, are dealing with property laws and restitution. Verses 1 through 4. Go back. Verses 1 through 4, restitution for theft. Look at the harm done versus the crime committed. What harm came out of this theft? So it's looking at degrees of punishment based upon what the injury was, if you will, or the loss was for theft. 4 to 5, how do you handle damages from neglect? I'll just interject my own thing here. If you borrow tools from somebody, return those tools at least in as good a shape as you got them, maybe better shape. If you borrow a lawnmower, be sure that you fill up the gas when you take it back to the person you borrowed it from. That's my personal opinion. If you borrow something that has a blade or that type of thing to it, maybe you get it sharpened before you take it back. Clean it up before you take it back. And if you damage it, fix it and repair it before you take it back. You ever had stuff somebody borrowed and they bring it back, and when you finally get around to using it, something's wrong with it? And you just know the person that borrowed it, It had to happen there. It couldn't have been my kids playing with it in the garage or anything. Had to be that. Okay. And then, let's see, verses 6 through 13, property responsibility disputes, 14 through 15. How do you handle a situation with borrowed or rented animals? What do you do if there's a situation there where they're stolen, where they get out of the pen, where they fall into the ditch? All those kind of scenarios are taken care of. And then in verses 16 through 31 are areas of social responsibility. And part of the main part of verses 16 through 17 have to do with a bride price, which was paid in that culture and at that time. And talks about a couple who may have engaged in sexual intercourse before marriage. They're treated as if they were married. I put that in quotes. And the bride price is due to the woman's family, whether or not they actually are allowed to get married or not. And this goes into the whole deal about, first of all, the immorality of having sexual intercourse before marriage, but it also looks at this idea of bride price. It's not buying and selling of women as if they're property, but it's the honor that is due, for example, to the parents, like things we'd call dowry today, but it's the price that they pay is an honor demonstrating the value of the woman, not degrading her as property, but a demonstration of her value. Okay, chapter 23. First of all, justice and mercy, verses 1 through 9. You shall not spread, verse 1, you shall not spread a false report. And wrong page, there we go. So the emphasis is on honesty, justice, and fair treatment, with a reminder that God is the enforcer in these cases. So it deals with first part deals with false reports, absolute honesty in speaking about others. And certainly that lesson is one we all need today in terms of how we speak about others, whether we give false reports, whether we withhold truth that would show a person in a good light, but we're piling on and showing things in a negative light in our little circle, whatever that is, 2 people or more. And again, the importance of dealing honestly with each other. And verses 4 through 5 emphasize that you're to act in good faith toward your brothers and sisters, even if you dislike that person. And that's a tough lesson. Christ gets into that in Matthew 5, 44 and 45, in that area there, if you want to look that up, and in addition to other areas. But the emphasis here is on our treatment of people and our demonstration of good faith in an active way, which is agape love. In an active way, demonstrating our love toward them, even if we don't like them, even if we dislike them, even if they treat us horribly. There's a way that we're supposed to treat our fellow man. Okay. One of the reasons for that, verses 6 through 9, is that, and what is implied there is that if God treats us with the mercy and grace that He does, how in the world can we not treat others that way? Because we are the worst, if you will, and we are in need of His mercy and His grace, and why should we not show that toward our fellow man? It's incumbent on us to do that. Those who wrongly cause the death of an innocent person in these verses, 6 through 9, become themselves guilty by reason of their unjust action. In effect, they're also treated as if they participated in it. Then it finishes up talking about bribes. And what's one of the problems with bribes? Bribes of officials, bribes of judges, bribes of neighbors in a dispute. What is one of the problems with bribes? Is there a problem? Yeah, trying to get out of the consequences and trying to get someone else to give more favorable justice toward you and less justice toward somebody else, that type of thing. So if you're bribing an official, then you're looking out for yourself, number one. Number two, you're not looking out for your brother, and that's a sin, is doing that. Okay. And then verses 10 through 13 talk about the Sabbath laws. I appreciate JP's sermon on that, on the importance of the Sabbath, which is emphasized all the way through the Bible, all the way through up into Hebrews, where it talks about the days of rest and Sabbath and what the rest actually pictured, where it started in terms of creation. If you want to read about it, go ahead and read about that in Hebrews. Here it talks about the ground and 6 years of cultivation of the ground, and then 1 year of fallow, which we understand is good for the earth, but it's also good for the people. It's good for the earth in that nutrients can be replenished if you're gardening or using agriculture to live by. It says 6 years good, 1 year of fallow that allows the renourishment of the land. Okay. And then the establishment of the Sabbath, and we'll move on from there. Then it talks about the 3 feasts. Yes.
They're trying to get out of something. They'll be better for you, or they'll do this, or I'll mow the grass, or whatever. So what's the consequences when they're trying to bribe?
It doesn't say. Yeah, so it's up to, it depends on how much the bribe's for. That's a joke. I'm not serious on that. It doesn't give a specific there. It just simply says it's wrong. Therefore, conclusion is it's sinful. And I would say, therefore, if it's found to be the case, it would be up to whoever the judge is in the particular case that has found that going on. Yeah, Zach.
I think this kind of brings up a good point of these 2 chapters in general, and a lot of when we get to Leviticus is a lot of it we look at these laws and okay, how can I enact justice for this wrong that's been done to me? But a lot of the purpose of these was God showing how to apply mercy in those situations as well.
Right.
I think of in like 2 Samuel 12 when Nathan approaches David and says, look, there's this guy, he's got a lot of sheep, there's this other guy, he's got this one lamb, and he takes it, slaughters it, has a feast. And David's reaction is to not only double what we see in God's law, because the man, according to the law, should give 2 lambs back to this man.
Right.
He says he should pay back 4-fold and also should be put to death, because that's what David thinks is right as far as justice goes. And so then Nathan says, you know, you're the man.
Thou art the man.
You're guilty of this.
Right.
And yet you're not going to get what you think should be justice. You're going to receive God's mercy for that. And we see that all throughout these chapters. It's this idea of if we're going to apply what we think should be done for a bribe or for any kind of, you know, disservice to us, our justice is going to be probably a lot more harsh than what God would say. Here's what the actual thing that you should do is, and you should be merciful to these sojourners, to these people that you're living with. You're going to get your justice, but
That's right.
you need to do it my way.
And if David had been consistent, that justice would have been meted out to him. And but in this case, he was, of course, he was the top guy, but still, he recognized how wrong he was in that case. Okay, good point, Zach. Thank you. Okay, so the three feasts that are mentioned here, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and this is, in effect, an ongoing feast, if you will, because it started at Passover. And so this is going to continue throughout to the time of Christ. And then the Feast of Harvest, which is also the Feast of Pentecost, 50 days after Passover. And that feast, obviously, is going to be kept up till the time of Christ. And then the Feast of Ingathering, or Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. So, these three feasts are established. There'll be others later on an ongoing basis. Okay, I'm going to move along. In verses 20 through 33, God tells them that it's a summing up of those laws that had just been given. And it talks about how the Lord's angel, or the angel who is Lord, is another rendering of that, Yahweh. God will guard and guide them and direct them. And so they're going to move on. And he talks about the promises made in terms of the land that they're to occupy. And that's the end of chapter 23. We'll stop there. I can't possibly summarize 24. I'll leave that up for whoever's teaching Wednesday night to either move on or whatever they want to do on that. Okay, appreciate your comments today. We're going to stop there. If you have the clicker, if you've seen the remote, it's missing. And check with your kids, see if they got it. Thank you for your comments today.
Very good class. I bet
Thank you.
I bet if you
And that's the dull stuff.
Yes. I bet if you go back and look at the film